Have you ever had the feeling that something is changing around you, but you can't quite explain what it is? Not just in politics, not just in culture, not just in the daily headlines that flash across your screen and disappear a few hours later. Something deeper, something happening beneath the surface, something that affects your family, your faith, your future, and even your soul. What I'm about to share is something I have hesitated to say publicly for many years, not because I doubted it, not because I lacked evidence, and certainly not because I was afraid. I remained silent because I questioned whether people were ready to hear it. Today, I am no longer sure that waiting is an option. Something has shifted in the spiritual world. Something ancient, something dark, something that has been quietly growing while most people have been distracted by the noise of everyday life. It has been developing beneath our conversations, beneath our entertainment, beneath our institutions, and even beneath the walls of many churches. Most people have absolutely no idea it is happening. I am not speaking to frighten you. Fear is not useful. Fear clouds judgment and weakens the soul. What I want is your attention. I want you to listen carefully because what I am about to explain may be one of the most important realities you encounter this year. For decades, I have served as a priest. For decades, I have worked in the ministry of exorcism. I have witnessed situations that most people would struggle to believe. I have sat across from manifestations of evil that were not symbolic, not psychological, and not theatrical. I've encountered realities that forced me to understand spiritual warfare in ways that books alone never could. Through those experiences, I have learned something important about the enemy. He studies humanity. He studies our habits, our weaknesses, our fears, our desires, and our blind spots. He understands how cultures rise and fall. He understands how families grow strong and how they can be weakened. Most importantly, he understands that the easiest way to defeat people is not through direct confrontation. It is through deception. For much of the last century, concealment was one of his greatest strategies. The goal was simple: convince people that evil is not real. Convince them that spiritual warfare belongs to ancient history. Convince them that the demonic is merely a symbol, a myth, or a relic of a less educated age. Once people stop believing an enemy exists, they stop defending themselves. And that strategy worked remarkably well. Many Christians grew up without learning anything practical about spiritual warfare. Many churches stopped speaking about it. Seminaries reduced their emphasis on it. Entire generations were raised without understanding how to spiritually protect themselves, their families, or their homes. The enemy became invisible. But I believe we are entering a different phase now. The signs are increasingly difficult to ignore. During the early years of my ministry, cases of possession, oppression, and infestation followed familiar patterns. There were recognizable causes: occult involvement, persistent grave sin, family histories marked by spiritual wounds, deliberate rejection of God. The cases were serious, but they remained relatively contained. Today, what I am seeing is different, and I am not the only exorcist saying this. The increase is not merely individual, it is cultural. What concerns me is not simply that isolated people are making destructive choices. What concerns me is that entire societies are slowly moving away from the very foundations that once protected them. We are witnessing a gradual abandonment of God, the sacraments, objective morality, family life, and the natural order that sustains healthy communities. Whenever a vacuum is created, something eventually fills it. Spiritually speaking, vacuums do not remain empty. As faith retreats, confusion advances. As truth becomes uncertain, deception becomes easier. As prayer disappears, other influences rush in to occupy the space that remains. This is why I say the enemy is no longer hiding. Look carefully at what modern culture celebrates. Look at how frequently sacred realities are mocked. Look at how often behaviors once recognized as destructive are now presented as virtuous. Look at the growing inversion of values that previous generations would have recognized immediately. This is not merely social change. There is an intelligence operating behind deception. There is purpose behind confusion. There is direction behind the chaos. That does not mean that people caught up in these movements are evil. In fact, many are sincere. Many genuinely believe they are pursuing freedom, happiness, acceptance, meaning, or justice. That is precisely why deception is effective. The enemy rarely presents darkness as darkness. He presents it as enlightenment. He presents it as liberation. He presents it as compassion. He takes legitimate human desires and redirects them toward counterfeit solutions. People often think that because someone is deceived, there must be no deceiver. That conclusion is a mistake. The spread of confusion does not happen by accident. The weakening of spiritual life does not happen accidentally. The collapse of moral clarity does not happen accidentally. Behind these developments is an intelligence that understands humanity extremely well. And that intelligence has been studying human weakness for far longer than any civilization has existed. My purpose in sharing this is not to create panic. It is to help you see clearly. Because you cannot defend against a threat you refuse to recognize. You cannot protect your family from an attack you do not know is occurring. And you cannot rebuild what is being dismantled unless you first understand exactly what is under attack. In the next part, we are going to examine the specific targets of this assault. We will look at the three faculties of the human soul that the enemy attacks first, why they are so important, and why the modern world seems perfectly designed to weaken them. Once you understand that pattern, you will begin to see the battlefield in a way you never have before. What makes this situation even more concerning is that these attacks on the intellect, the will, and the affections are not happening separately. They are happening all at once. Each one strengthens the others. A weakened intellect struggles to recognize truth. A weakened will struggles to act on truth even when it is recognized. Disordered affections pull the soul toward desires that compete with what is good and holy. When all three are compromised simultaneously, a person becomes spiritually vulnerable in ways they often do not even realize. This is why so many people today feel confused, exhausted, anxious, and spiritually disoriented. They may not identify the source of the problem. They may blame stress, politics, work, relationships, or economic pressures. While those things certainly play a role, there is often something deeper taking place beneath the surface. There is a battle for the soul occurring at a level many people never stop to consider. As an exorcist, I have learned that the enemy rarely begins with dramatic manifestations. Hollywood has done tremendous damage by convincing people that demonic influence always looks like extraordinary phenomena. In reality, the enemy prefers subtlety. He prefers gradual corruption. He prefers small compromises that accumulate over time. A person does not wake up one morning completely separated from God. The process usually begins with tiny decisions: a neglected prayer life, a gradual abandonment of the sacraments, a growing attachment to comfort, a willingness to tolerate small sins, a refusal to confront personal weaknesses. Little by little, the spiritual immune system weakens. Then something interesting happens. The person begins searching for meaning. Every human soul was created for God. Every human heart carries a desire for transcendence. No amount of entertainment, achievement, pleasure, or success can completely remove that desire. It remains there, sometimes hidden, sometimes ignored, but always present. The danger arises when people attempt to satisfy that desire apart from God. Throughout history, whenever authentic faith weakens, counterfeit spirituality rushes in to fill the void. We are witnessing exactly that today. People who would never step inside a confessional will spend thousands of dollars seeking spiritual experiences through questionable practices. Individuals who dismiss Christian prayer as outdated will enthusiastically embrace techniques and rituals whose origins they barely understand. Entire industries have developed around spiritual exploration detached from truth. The tragedy is that many of these individuals are not looking for evil. They are looking for meaning. They are looking for purpose. They are looking for healing. They are looking for answers. The enemy understands this. He studies human nature carefully. He knows how to take legitimate desires and redirect them toward dangerous substitutes. This is why discernment is so important. Not everything spiritual comes from God. That statement should be obvious to Christians, yet many people today have forgotten it entirely. Scripture repeatedly warns about false spirits, false prophets, false teachings, and deceptive influences. The church has always taught that supernatural experiences must be tested carefully because not every spiritual reality originates from heaven. Yet, modern culture encourages exactly the opposite approach. People are told to follow their feelings, trust their intuition, create their own truth, seek whatever makes them feel empowered. These messages sound attractive because they appeal to the desire for freedom. Yet genuine freedom has never meant doing whatever feels good in the moment. Genuine freedom is the ability to choose what is true and good. The enemy's counterfeit version of freedom always leads in the opposite direction. It promises liberation but produces slavery. It promises empowerment but creates dependence. It promises enlightenment but results in confusion. I have seen this pattern repeatedly. Individuals become fascinated with practices they believe are harmless. They begin experimenting out of curiosity. Over time, they notice increased anxiety, unusual disturbances, spiritual heaviness, obsessive thoughts, or an inability to pray. Eventually, they seek help, confused by what has happened. Many never connect the dots. They never realize that spiritual doors were opened gradually. Again, I am not saying every difficulty has a demonic cause. Such claims would be irresponsible. Human beings experience suffering for many reasons. Psychological struggles, physical illness, trauma, and natural hardships are real and must be addressed appropriately. But ignoring the spiritual dimension entirely is equally irresponsible. The Christian worldview has always recognized that human beings are both physical and spiritual. When either dimension is neglected, our understanding becomes incomplete. What concerns me most is not the existence of these dangers. The church has always known such dangers exist. What concerns me is how unprepared people are. Many Catholics have never been taught even the most basic principles of spiritual warfare. They know very little about temptation, virtue, sacramental grace, or the importance of maintaining a disciplined spiritual life. As a result, they often find themselves entering battles they do not recognize with weapons they do not know how to use. Imagine a soldier sent into combat without training. Imagine someone handed armor but never taught how to wear it. Imagine someone possessing powerful tools yet leaving them untouched because they do not understand their value. That is increasingly what I see happening spiritually. The church possesses an extraordinary treasury of wisdom regarding spiritual combat. The saints understood these realities deeply. They knew that holiness was not passive. They knew that every soul must engage in a struggle against temptation and sin. They also knew something many modern Christians forget. Victory is possible. The enemy is powerful, but he is not all-powerful. He is intelligent, but he is not all-knowing. He is active, but he remains a creature subject to God's authority. That distinction changes everything. The purpose of understanding spiritual warfare is not to become obsessed with darkness. The purpose is to understand reality clearly enough to choose the light. And that brings us to what I believe may be one of the most dangerous developments of our age. Something quietly entering homes, shaping minds, influencing families, and affecting millions of people who have no idea how profoundly it is transforming them. In the next part, we are going to examine that reality in detail, because understanding it may be one of the most important steps toward protecting yourself and those you love. The most dangerous spiritual development I see today is not something hidden in dark buildings or secret societies. It is not limited to occult groups or fringe movements. In fact, its greatest danger comes from how ordinary it appears. It has quietly entered homes, classrooms, workplaces, and even churches. Most people encounter it every day without recognizing what it is doing to them. I am talking about the systematic reshaping of attention itself. Every generation faces unique temptations, but our generation faces something unprecedented. Never before in human history have so many forces competed simultaneously for the human mind. Every notification, every advertisement, every video, every algorithm is fighting for one thing: your attention. Why does this matter spiritually? Because attention is the doorway to contemplation. You become what you consistently focus on. The saints understood this long before neuroscience existed. What occupies the mind eventually shapes the heart. What shapes the heart eventually directs the will. What directs the will ultimately determines the course of a person's life. The enemy understands this principle perfectly. If he cannot immediately persuade someone to reject God, he can simply keep them distracted from God. Distraction has become one of the most effective spiritual weapons of our age. Notice how difficult silence has become. Many people cannot sit quietly for 5 minutes without reaching for a device. They cannot drive without audio playing. They cannot eat without watching something. They cannot stand in line without checking a screen. Every empty moment is immediately filled. At first glance, this seems harmless, but spiritual growth requires interior space. Prayer requires attention. Discernment requires reflection. Wisdom requires silence. When a person's life becomes saturated with constant stimulation, those capacities begin to weaken. I often speak with people who tell me they want a deeper relationship with God. They want peace. They want clarity. They want direction. Then I ask about their daily habits. Many spend hours consuming content every day, but only a few minutes in prayer each week. They expose themselves to endless streams of opinions, yet rarely open Scripture. They know the latest controversies online, but struggle to remember the last time they examined their conscience seriously. This is not because they are evil, it is because they are distracted, and distraction, when prolonged enough, becomes a spiritual condition. The enemy does not necessarily need people to hate God. In many cases, it is enough that they simply ignore him. A soul that never intentionally turns toward God gradually drifts. The drift may be slow, it may be almost invisible, but it is real. Think about how relationships work. No marriage remains strong through neglect. No friendship flourishes without communication. No family remains united when its members stop spending time together. Yet many people expect their relationship with God to remain strong, despite giving him almost no attention. Then they wonder why faith feels distant. They wonder why prayer feels empty. They wonder why temptations seem stronger than before. The answer is often found in what has captured their attention. What we repeatedly expose ourselves to becomes normal. That principle explains much of what has happened culturally over the last several decades. Ideas once considered shocking gradually become accepted through repetition. Behaviors once recognized as harmful become celebrated through constant exposure. The human mind adapts remarkably quickly. This is why vigilance matters. Not paranoia, not fear. Vigilance. The Christian tradition has always emphasized guarding the senses because what enters through the eyes and ears eventually influences the imagination. The imagination is not a trivial faculty. It is powerful. It provides the images from which desires are often formed. When the imagination becomes saturated with impurity, violence, cynicism, vanity, or selfishness, those influences do not simply disappear when the screen turns off. They remain. They shape perceptions. They influence reactions. They affect decisions. Many people underestimate how much spiritual formation is occurring through media consumption. Every story teaches something. Every image communicates values. Every repeated message forms habits of thought. The question is whether those habits are moving a person toward God or away from Him. Parents especially need to understand this. The battle for children is increasingly a battle for imagination. Who is teaching your children what is good? Who is teaching them what love means? Who is teaching them what success looks like? Who is teaching them what human dignity is? If parents are not intentionally providing those answers, someone else will. And increasingly, that someone else is not operating from a Christian understanding of reality. The result is a generation facing enormous confusion. Many young people are not rejecting faith because they have carefully studied theology and concluded Christianity is false. Many are rejecting it because they have never encountered it deeply enough to understand what it actually claims. They have been given fragments, pieces, slogans, simplifications. Meanwhile, the culture provides a constant stream of alternative narratives 24 hours a day. The imbalance is obvious. This is why serious formation matters. Faith cannot survive indefinitely as a cultural habit. It must become a conviction. A person must know not only what they believe, but why they believe it. They must understand the beauty, coherence, and truth of the faith. Otherwise, they become vulnerable to every new idea that presents itself as progress. The enemy thrives in confusion. Clarity is dangerous to him. Truth is dangerous to him. Conviction is dangerous to him. This is why one of the most important spiritual disciplines today is intentional focus. Choose what enters your mind. Choose what shapes your imagination. Choose what receives your attention. Not everything deserves access to your soul. The saints guarded their interior lives carefully because they understood something we have largely forgotten. The battle for holiness begins long before major decisions are made. It begins in daily habits. It begins in ordinary choices. It begins in what we consistently allow ourselves to think about. And when those habits are ordered toward God, something remarkable begins to happen. The intellect becomes clearer. The will becomes stronger. The affections become healthier. The soul gradually regains its proper orientation. That restoration is possible. It is happening right now in countless lives, but it requires intentional action. Because while attention is one of the primary battlegrounds of our age, it is far from the only one. There is another target the enemy pursues relentlessly, a target so important that entire cultural movements have been built around weakening it. And if that target falls, the consequences reach far beyond any individual person. In the next part, we will examine why the family remains the primary battlefield of spiritual warfare and why its protection has never been more important than it is today. If there is one institution that has been targeted more aggressively than any other in modern history, it is the family. That statement is not political. It is not ideological. It is a conclusion reached after years of observing the spiritual patterns that emerge wherever faith declines and confusion increases. The reason is actually very simple. The family is the primary place where human beings first encounter love, authority, sacrifice, truth, and God. Long before a child enters a classroom, long before they encounter social media, long before they develop political opinions or philosophical beliefs, they learn from the family. They learn what relationships look like. They learn what trust feels like. They learn whether promises matter. They learn whether forgiveness is possible. Most importantly, they begin forming their earliest understanding of God through the experiences they have within the home. This is why attacks against the family have such profound consequences. When the family weakens, everything built upon it becomes unstable. The enemy understands this perfectly. He understands that it is far easier to influence an entire civilization by weakening families than by confronting every individual directly. Think about the pattern that has unfolded over recent decades. Marriage has increasingly been presented as optional. Commitment has been redefined as temporary. Sacrifice has been replaced with self-fulfillment. Parenthood has often been portrayed as a burden rather than a blessing. Authority within the home has been treated with suspicion. The result has been predictable. Many people enter adulthood without ever witnessing a stable model of family life. They are asked to build something they have never seen. They are expected to create healthy relationships without having experienced them firsthand. That challenge is enormous. As a priest, I have spent countless hours speaking with individuals carrying wounds that originated within the family. Some experienced abandonment. Others experienced neglect. Some endured constant conflict. Others grew up in homes where faith was absent altogether. These wounds are real, and they often influence spiritual life more deeply than people realize. One of the most common patterns I encounter is difficulty trusting God because of damaged experiences with authority. If a child grows up with a father who is absent, abusive, unpredictable, or emotionally unavailable, the concept of God as Father can become difficult to understand. Intellectually, they may know God is loving. Emotionally, however, trust becomes difficult. This does not mean healing is impossible. Far from it. God's grace can restore what has been damaged, but it does help explain why the enemy works so relentlessly against the family. Every wound becomes a potential point of vulnerability. Every fracture creates opportunities for confusion. Every breakdown in formation makes future struggles more likely. This is why Christian families cannot afford passivity. Many parents assume that occasional religious instruction will be enough. They assume that attending Mass once a week will somehow outweigh the hundreds of other influences shaping their children every day. Unfortunately, that assumption is becoming increasingly unrealistic. Children are being formed continuously. Every platform forms them. Every friendship influences them. Every piece of content teaches them something. Every institution communicates values. The question is not whether formation is occurring. The question is who is doing the forming. For centuries, Christian families understood that parents carried primary responsibility for spiritual formation. Faith was not outsourced. It was lived. Children saw prayer happen. They witnessed sacrifice, they observed forgiveness, they heard scripture, they learned doctrine. Most importantly, they saw adults taking God seriously. That example mattered more than any lecture ever could. Today, many parents want their children to have faith, but they rarely demonstrate what serious spiritual life looks like. Children notice that. They notice whether prayer is a priority. They notice whether faith influences decisions. They notice whether Christianity appears real or merely cultural. Young people are often far more perceptive than adults realize. They can detect inconsistency quickly. If parents claim faith is important but organize every aspect of life around other priorities, children receive the message clearly. Actions always teach louder than words. This is why the family remains such an important battlefield. Strong families create strong communities. Strong communities support strong parishes. Strong parishes strengthen the church. The process works in reverse as well. Weak families create weak communities. Weak communities weaken institutions. Eventually, entire cultures become spiritually fragile. What encourages me, however, is that the solution remains available. Families do not need perfection. They need direction. Many parents become discouraged because they compare themselves to idealized standards. They look at their failures. They look at their mistakes. They look at opportunities they missed. Then they conclude it is too late. That conclusion is false. It is never too late to begin rebuilding. A family can begin praying together tonight. A father can begin leading spiritually today. A mother can begin teaching the faith with renewed confidence immediately. Children can witness genuine conversion within their own home. In fact, some of the strongest faith journeys begin precisely when families recognize their need for change. The enemy wants people to believe they are trapped. He wants them to believe the damage is permanent. He wants them to believe nothing can improve. Despair is one of his favorite tools because despair prevents action. Hope, by contrast, creates movement. Hope inspires effort. Hope motivates conversion. Hope opens the door to grace. That is why, no matter how serious the challenges become, Christians must never surrender to discouragement. The family remains under pressure. That reality is undeniable. Yet the family also remains one of the greatest instruments God has given for the transmission of faith, virtue, and love. When families are rooted in prayer, nourished by the sacraments, committed to truth, and united in purpose, they become remarkably resilient. They become places where children learn not only how to survive spiritually, but how to thrive. And that resilience will become increasingly important. Because the challenges facing families are only one part of a much larger struggle. Beyond the home, a broader battle is unfolding, one involving institutions, culture, education, and even the very concept of objective truth itself. In the next part, we will examine why the assault on truth may be the most dangerous challenge of all, and why recovering clarity has become one of the most urgent tasks facing Christians today.